Hello, this is Dreaded, and today's video topic is going to be the Zero to Hero run on the Earthquake Gathering Storm Shaman. So the whole concept around this build is to utilize the node that allows you to consume Gathering Storm stacks with Earthquake. So if you weren't here for the last time I played a Shaman, it went absolutely awfully. We were playing Tempest Strike with Gathering Storm. It legally did enough damage to be quote unquote called a build, but it was definitely not what I would like to see. The biggest problem with it being that Tempest Strike did not hold its end of the bargain. While, of course, Gathering Storm did plenty of damage, the Tempest portion of Tempest Strike did not really hold up to any standards, mainly because, if you don't know, recently Tempest Strike was reworked, and in last Epoch, if your favorite skill's being reworked, you have a 50-50 chance on it being viable in the end game, depending on how many more damage modifiers they put in the tree. So, yeah, pour one out to all my Tempest Strike boys. The melee version for Tempest Strike actually does pretty well. It's just the spell version that's supremely lacking. So, yeah, we're playing Earthquake instead this time around. Why is that? Well, there's a node inside Earthquake that allows you to consume Gathering Storm stacks. This makes it so that it's a much better, what do you call it, vehicle for Gathering Storm, as you can run the Friends of the Tempest node that gives you a 40% chance on friendly hit, like friendly minion hit, to give you a storm stack if you have 1 to 15, and it goes up all the way to 15, right? You do have to actually hit something first and then this node will work, but once that happens, you can consume those by utilizing Earthquake. And turns out this build actually works pretty well. Now, if you don't know, this is actually very similar to a build I played a long time ago, and that's going to be the Tornado Werebear. It's crazy I can say a long time ago, and it feels like I just played that yesterday. But yeah, so Tornado Werebear, the idea is you actually swap between bear form and human form to spam a bunch of tornadoes, and those tornadoes, they spew out Gathering Storm bolts, and that build does a very large amount of damage, right? But the problem with it is its clear is especially once they nerf the bug that's causing it to have like 3 screens of radius. The clear on that build won't be as strong. So I've been trying to find a build that had better clear, as single target's good and all, but I actually like having good clear on my build. Single target is like a secondary thing, right? And turns out this build actually ends up having better clear than the aforementioned Tornado Werebear Druid. So that's actually where this is placed, in my opinion. Is it has less single target than the Tornado Werebear Druid, but it has more clear than the Tornado Werebear Druid, because you can zoom around with Shaman with like 120% movement speed, right? And just like smack, 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 you're good to go. It feels great. Just the gameplay of it, like when you're clearing monoliths and stuff like that. I have not played a smoother build in this series, like the Zero to Hero series. Like, no build has come even close to the amount of smoothness that this build has had for clearing. Like, it's felt great, like, overall. Like, I'm really happy with how this build turned out. Its single target is a little bit lower than I would like, but unfortunately, with a lot of the new skills and a lot of the new stuff, new tech and all that, they have this really weird scaling curve where if you have really good gear, they end up doing insane amounts of damage, but if you have mediocre gear, they do mediocre amounts of damage. This is a lot different than, like, let's say Falconer, where it does insane damage on any amount of gear, right? But the reason why is because Gathering Storm is a point hungry tree. Like, for instance, there is a node that literally gives me 30% more clear if, like, but I don't have plus levels to Gathering Storm to grab it. There's literally a node that says whenever you consume a storm stack, you have a chance to cast another storm bolt at a nearby enemy. I literally can't run this node because like, I can't, because I don't have enough points. And there's also a node that gives you 40% lightning pen, which would almost be 40% more damage, right? Like, I could also run that if I actually had that, if I had better gear, right? Like, this is like what I like about builds in last Epoch, is like builds that can keep going and keep going and keep going, like this one, right? Now, if you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of currently supporting me and the best way to show me that you want more content like this. Fresh character selection screen. Okay, this time maybe with Gathering, right? If you don't know, recently I played a Gathering Storm build with Tempest Strike and it was very bad. So we're going to try to repair our faith in EHC and play a good Gathering Storm build. So the idea is we're going to be leveling with Gathering Storm this time. So if you are the kind of person that's like, I want to play the build I'm leveling as, right? Like, cool. This is good for you. This is very good for you. Here we did just put in the node that allows us to make Gathering Storm ranged. So how do I feel about Gathering Storm ranged? It's a little weird. It doesn't auto target, it shoots where your cursor is. And that's a blessing and a curse, right? You get to choose where it shoots, but at the same time, it feels a lot more clunky than, like, let's say Smite. So a good example here is, let's assume that Smite had the same targeting. It would feel way worse. I think that they should just pull the band-aid off and just make Gathering Storm, when you turn it into the lightning bolt, you turn it so that it auto targets for you. Because let me tell you, the AoE on Gathering Storm, like range, is so small. Like the AoE on it is so small that half the time I felt like I was missing. It is important for what we want to do later, but overall, I wouldn't blame you if you stayed with the melee version, but there are some reasons why we're staying with the range version, which I'll talk about later. There's the Act 1 boss, of course. Same shit as always. Just kill a Haruspex Orion. Not really that big of a deal. Put down some totems, smack them with Gathering Storm. You're good to go. Not really that difficult. Now, leveling Primalists is never very pretty. Uh, I found in general leveling Primalists to be kind of really annoying, mainly because a lot of your skills and abilities that make you feel strong, they require you to be specialized in them, and they require you to be specialized very hard into them, like plus 10 points. Like, for instance, the nodes that make Warcry feel good, especially for melee builds, is like at least 10 points in the tree. And then you have to also get Maelstrom, which is also another like 10 points in Maelstrom's tree, especially if you're leveling as Gathering Storm, right? So all of this combined leads to Shaman being a very lackluster experience, or pretty much any Primalist. Thankfully, Shaman gets a break when they get Storm Totem. I actually get carried by unspec Storm Totem for a while, so it makes up for the fact that the build doesn't really pop off until later. But ooh, let me tell you, it definitely doesn't feel good leveling as Gathering Storm, at least the ranged version. If you want a better way to level this build, I would suggest checking out the prior Zero to Hero run on Shaman, the Tempest Strike Shaman, because the way I leveled in that video is going to be way better than how I leveled here. As turns out, Tempest Strike early on ends up being okay when you get it all set up, like consuming the Gathering Storm stacks and stuff like that and going to the Friends of the Forest. Not the version that I'm going for here, because we don't really end up going Friends of the Forest until way later on, mainly because I was trying other ways of playing Gathering Storm. Here's the mini void amalgamation here. As you can see, we get Storm Totem, and Storm Totem literally carries us like in single target. Like, it's just crazy how much single target Storm Totem does early on. I'm pretty sure there's probably a bug or two. Now, of course, you must be wondering, Dread, uh, Storm Totem. Why haven't you ever played Storm Totem? Well, Storm Totem is bugged to fuck. There are some problems with Storm Totem that's causing it to do almost infinite amounts of damage, which makes it so that there's not really it's not really worth for me to play the build until it's reworked. Because, like, why would I make a build guide showing off a buck build? Like, there's no reason to. I can just simply come back around to Storm Totem when it finally, gets fixed. Here we are with the final boss. Like I said, Storm Totem just carries us all the way through the early game. If you were smarter, you would probably actually spec into Storm Totem. Like I said, the way I leveled this build was not the way you should level the build in general. You should level it the way that I leveled in the Tempest Strike video. Here's a quick rundown of Act 2. Of course, like I said, I really don't feel like I should go into detail of how I leveled this time around, mainly because I think that this version, the way I leveled, was Incorrect. I just kind of just did it because why not? Like the damage is very low, as you can see. Like it's so much better just to go with the Friends of the Storm route that like it's so not worth it going this way, in my opinion. Like, trust me, you're better off leveling any other way, including Storm Totem, by the way. You just level with Storm Totem. And that would be way better than whatever the fuck I was trying to do here. Now, this is when I did get access to Earthquake. We didn't get all the pieces of the puzzle yet because I wanted to try going self-cast Gathering Storm instead of going Friends of the Tempest, mainly because I thought that I could scale enough cast speed to get enough generation of stacks to make the build function. But as I saw later on, that's definitely not the case. But like whenever I do actually get to use Earthquake to like consume the stacks, it feels amazing. The biggest problem is, like I said, is the generation of said stacks, like could be fixed if we went and grabbed that node. Now, here's our first monolith. As you can see, like I said, it's a little cringe having to self-cast Gathering Storm like this to generate stacks. I think that the self-use Gathering Storm, like using Gathering Storm yourself to generate stuff, should get buffed. Specifically, the ranged version. The melee version isn't as bad as you can get extra generation in the tree, but the ranged version just feels kind of off. Like it just doesn't feel like good. And I think the problem is it doesn't have that auto targeting feature that Smite has. If you don't know, Smite is very similar to Gathering Storm, right? In this regard, it's just Smite auto targets. Well, this doesn't. Now, of course, you can't use Smite without an enemy, but to be honest, that's not really a downside in my opinion. As you can see here, like I probably miss a lot of Gathering Storm hits, mainly just because like I'm just not aiming properly. And I'll be honest, after playing for like hours and hours and hours, like in the end, I really don't want to have to think about actually hitting my targets because I play for like 10 plus hours at a time. Like the less things I have to think about, the better. Now here's our A-bomb kill. As you can see, we have a little bit of what you'll see later on. We have a decent amount of generation to be able to show you the interaction between, of course, Gathering Storm and Earthquake, just generating all these storm stacks and then consuming them. It actually feels really good. The damage is there, the concept is there. It's just I don't have all the pieces yet. But whenever we do actually get to use Earthquake and consume like 10 full stacks of Gathering Storm, it looks amazing. Now, of course, I'm sure it would look even better if we had like the Frost version of Gathering Storm or the Earth version, but nonetheless, I wanted to play Lightning mainly because of Storm Totem's really good capability of generating storm stacks, as you'll see later. Here's our second monolith. As you can see, absurd amounts of movement speed now that we actually have haste and frenzy on our maelstrom and stuff like that. We can also have the storms coming from maelstrom as well, giving us extra clear. All of that combined leads us to not feeling like as though we have potato clear, which helps a lot in the early game. Having really good clear matters a lot more than having good single target, because the quicker you can generate extra stability, the quicker you can get to the bosses, which means the quicker you can get through the run overall. Because generally, with the way that experience works right now, you just want to get to empowered monos as fast as possible, because the amount of experience you get in empowered monos is just so much more. Because sure, it is capped by your level, but you also get the increased modifiers. Here's our riot kill. Like I said, just the earthquake interaction, being able to just simply earthquake and consume all these stacks leads to having a very good amount of clear. But this is when we have Friends of the Storm. This is like when we actually start playing the build properly. As you can see, whenever we put down our Storm Totem, we're getting plenty of stacks, which then we can consume with Earthquake, and this combo ends up carrying us all the way through the rest of the game. Once you get the Friends of the Storm stuff, it feels so much better. As you can see in the footage, like it looks miles better than what we were dealing with before, in my opinion. Like so much better. Like here's our third monolith, her first third monolith. You can just see the drastic difference between not having Friends of the Storm and actually having it. We don't actually have to spend their casting Gathering Storm itself. We just simply need it to start the process, and we can just generate plenty of stacks with Storm Totem. As you can see, like, it just feels great running around at such ridiculous movement speeds, being able to just plop down an Earthquake like that and just cause so many Gathering Storms to come out. It feels so much better to do it this way, and I hate it. Mainly because, like, Friends of the Storm is a very strong node, and it's probably going to get nerfed one day. And I don't want it to get nerfed, but it feels so good, right? It's one of those problems where, like, they should probably buff the self-cast version of Storm Stacks. Like, you should generate, like, way more stacks when you are, like, literally doing the range or the melee version, right? Versus like just doing it like this, like Friends of the Tempest. Like, it's so much better like doing it this way. It's not even funny, and I don't like that because it gives them grounds to nerf this version. But in my opinion, this version is like good enough for what you want to be doing. It's not overpowered or anything. It's just overpowered in comparison to how bad everything else is, right? For the Gathering Storm stuff, which is like what my problem is. Like I feel like they're going to nerf this without thinking about the other ways of generating storm stacks, right? Which is like my problem here. But as you can see though, feels absolutely amazing. This is like when we were really gaming, when I was just like, yeah. And like I ended up playing for the rest of the session the entire time. Like I played this build all in one session, and this is like when it started to feel really good. Back to our famous penis farmer, Mr. Lagan here. So as you can see, the damage is absurd now that we have the Friends of the Tempest going, because now all we have to do is just worry about our mana. Now, I didn't prioritize this early enough, but in my opinion, what you should do is prioritize mana regen early on, maybe get it on your staff or something early on. Later on, you don't want to have mana regen, but like early on, you definitely want to have some source of mana regen, mainly because like, Earthquake actually costs a decent amount of mana. Now, the speed at which we generate storm stacks scales with minion cast speed, because the faster the storm totem casts, the more storm stacks we can create, right? So you get 60% cast speed in the storm totem tree, and then you can also get 30% on each totem. You can get some on the prefixes of your items. It's Cast speed with totems is something you definitely want to be looking for, as it increases the generation of your storm stacks. But remember, when you're generating more storm stacks, you do need to make sure that you have enough mana regen and cast speed to keep up with Earthquake. Because if you don't have enough cast speed with Earthquake, right, Earthquake's going to feel really slow and bad. As you can see in the footage, my Earthquake looks pretty quick. That's because I've actually invested into cast speed. Cast speed's very important for a build like this to make it feel good, because we could have like infinite amounts of movement speed, but if our Earthquake takes 5 years to hit with, it's going to feel garbage. So make sure you have cast speed on your Earthquake. Also, as well, like I said, make sure you get some mana sustain. It helps a lot that we're stacking attunement, as of course it gives us max mana, which gives us a much larger battery. So in Monoliths, we don't really feel it as much, but on single target, when we want to like be slamming down Earthquakes all the time, we need mana regen, which I neglected early on with the build. Here's our big daddy dragon. As you can see, the damage is there. We do grab the stun nodes inside Maelstrom, mainly because like we're hitting so much, might as well abuse the stun chance. The stun chance makes Monoliths feel a lot easier, because you'll end up in situations where you have like 2 diamond matrons on your screen, and having all that extra stun chance means that the diamond matrons, don't get to do anything, which helps a lot. So stacking stun chance actually is a viable option for a build like this, as you just hit so many times that it's actually worth it, in my opinion. Here's our first 9-ing monolith. Now let's talk about some build stuff. So this build could be better if you focused on spell EQ a lot more. So if you don't know, spell EQ does a lot of damage. It's a very good skill. Spell EQ has historically done a very large amount of damage because the scaling is there, definitely. The problem is we are in a solo self-found fresh environment. This means that we need to find a way to cap our crit quickly. And to cap our crit, we are actually utilizing the interaction between Maelstrom and the base crit you get per stack, and of course Warcry and some crit on our gear. Later on, we'll actually be capped on crit with Gathering Storm, but we'll only be at like 25% chance to crit with Earthquake. That's kind of poo poo. But later on in investment, what you can do is you can actually swap either to base crit rings and dump all of the nodes that give you base crit per, of course, Gathering Storm. You could do that. Or, of course, what you could do is run a base crit weapon like a rune dagger and then run a base crit offhand as well. This would allow you to be able to actually run base crit and crit with Earthquake. It's just the problem is this would require very good gear to function properly, because the biggest problem with a build like this is you want to stack attunement for the flat damage, you want to stack crit, you want to stack percent damage, because remember that attunement doesn't scale your damage. Remember, like your percent damage, because the attunement gives you flat damage, meaning that you need percent damage on your gear. So that's more slots dedicated to percent damage, right? So you end up in this really weird spot where you need percent damage and flat damage at the same time. And in my opinion, it's not really worth to focus on spell EQ until you have more investment. But once you can do that, it's great. Like you can run like, I don't know, a wrong warp in the end game. You can abuse all of that juicy like percent movement speed you have. Like for instance, if you have a wrong warp, Storm Totem, instead of giving you 40% increased damage, it gives you like 160% increased damage, right? And then all the stuff on your tree gives you percent increased damage, all the movement speed. So I think a wrong warp with a crit catalyst, crit capping with like, let's say, I don't know, probably Peak of the Mountain. You can probably play like a peak build of some kind with like Font of the Erased or something. All of that combined could lead to a build that feels a lot better. But like I said, that requires gear, and in the solo self on start stuff, we don't have gear. Gear happens way later in the discussion, because this is the start of a character. Now here's another monolith. As you can see, we're finally just super uber zooming. We can just like literally just slam the movement speed. As you can see, we're absolutely just destroying these monoliths, mainly just because the build just feels that good, right? We got a minus mana cost staff. So if you don't know, with Ligonian Diplomacy, it gives you like a 6 flat mana cost, but you can also get mana on the tree and mana in the passive tree as well. You can get like, I think like 10 mana total gained back whenever you use Gathering Storm, and that's essential for late game because you stack cast speed and then you try to get all your mana back that way instead of trying to do it the way that I'm doing it in the footage, right? You want to be able to stack cast speed to use Gathering Storm to generate yourself mana, because like I said, later on what's going to happen is you're going to have plenty of storm stacks, but you're not going to have plenty of mana. So you're definitely going to want to have a way of sustaining mana. But later on in the end game, once you have the Ligonian Diplomacy set up and all that, you have all the cast speed. I'm at like 140% right now in the end game, I think, right? That plus all the mana regen you can get as a shaman, that helps out immensely with what we're trying to do here. Well, now we're to Hira. Let's have a kind of another conversation. So I really hate how much HP bosses have in endgame. Uh, what do I mean by that? Well, if you were to go from where I'm at right now to like Herat, and then you were to go to like a Hira at 300 corruption, the HP difference is so staggering that I'm just confused of how it works like that. Like for instance, I kill a Herat in seconds here, right? Okay. But with the same character, while investing into the gear in the same playthrough, I can go from a Herat that takes 5 seconds to kill to a Herat that takes 2 minutes to kill, mainly because of just how much HP the bosses have in endgame. It's crazy to me that you can scale it that hard while other skills haven't really gotten buffed to, they haven't really gotten buffed to like make up for this, all right? Like, imagine trying to play, like, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a skill, like Surf and Strike, right? Imagine trying to play Surf and Strike with all of these new boss HPs and stuff like that. It's just crazy to me how boss HP has gotten so ballooned. I think it's a response to the amount of power creep that we've gotten, but the power creep isn't like what I would call equal. I've talked about this in the boss ward video, but the main problem is like there are just going to be some skills that are unsalvageable that even with infinite amounts of gear, you don't end up with infinite amounts of damage. Uh like in comparison to others. Like for instance, Gathering Storm is a good example of a skill that it has kind of a low starting point, but as you invest gear into it more and more and more, it feels better and better and better, right? It just scales really hard on gear and it feels really good, especially once you start getting the plus levels from the staff, getting the plus levels from your chest, getting the plus levels from like a twisted heart, stuff like that. And that would end up making it feel a lot better in my opinion. But the biggest problem is, like I said, there are skills that don't have this scaling factor. Like you have Servant Strike, like you have ways of scaling it, but you don't have enough multiplicative modifiers to make it worth your time, in my opinion, anyways. Or you end up having a skill like Tempest Strike where the spell portion of it, like the spell damage portion, is just very poor in general. The added damage effectiveness is very low at base, and then you have like no more damage modifiers than the tree. Like spell Tempest Strike is just criminal with how terrible it is. It's like just absolutely criminal how terrible it is. And I'm just like baffled by the fact that it actually like managed to come in that kind of a state. But speaking of, here's our Harbinger of Fear. As you can see, the damage is still there. We're doing plenty of damage, and we're actually surprisingly tanky. And that's just because we have the leech from our gloves, and that's enough to sustain ourselves on the Harbinger. Later on, we actually swap to the leech on a helmet. This is actually one of the problems we have later on is not enough leech. Later on, we can fix that with like gearing and stuff like that. But for the rest of this run, after I swap out of the Avarice gloves, my leech doesn't end up being that good in general, which ends up being a problem later on because it turns fights that I can normally face tank into fights that I can't. Now, here's our first empowered mono. As you can see, we just jump right into it with a stride. Like, really, like, I'm just so happy with how this build ended up feeling. Like, for the majority of the playthrough, for clear, it felt amazing. It's great to just slam the ground with Earthquake and then watch so many Gathering Storms go around. Like, let me put it like this. This is one of those builds that I would want to play for like a week straight and have a lot of fun with. Unfortunately, I can't do that right now, but later on I would like to do that. But yeah, this build, like S tier quality of life in my opinion. Just it just feels really good running around just slam, 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 and just feeling like you have the power of the storm at your fingertips. Like for the flavor of the build, like it's so fucking good. Now, of course, I did some empowered monos without actually unlocking COF. So here is me unlocking COF. We do actually use it a little bit to try to get a better staff than I have, but we don't end up with a better staff than the one I have right now. That's like one of the problems with this run is we never got a staff upgrade. Now, here's a quick DPS check. This is what the DPS looks like right now. As you can see, we do like 10k crits per like Gathering Storm, and once we actually do our Gathering Storm here, as you can see, 10 to 15k crits, that is like about 100k per click, which is good enough for empowered monos. The biggest problem is we only get up to like maybe 220k crits per Gathering Storm later on, and that's just because I never ended up with an upgrade to my staff. My staff ends up being the same staff the whole entire time, which sucks a lot in my opinion. Of course, here we go, the hardest part of the run. The biggest problem being that are like I don't have enough sustain to make it feel good because the biggest problem is we do a bunch of burst damage, but we don't have sustain over a period of time. Like for instance, as you can see here, like what ends up happening is I get low and I don't end up getting enough leech to leech back to full very quickly. Now, there's a few different ways that you could solve this. The main way you could solve it is to introduce the one affix the experimental one that makes it so you drain every second on your gloves. Just a tier 1 of this affix would mean that your leech would never turn off, which would mean that your leech effects would actually feel good. You could do that, that would work. You could just afford to get more leech. I just don't have enough leech percentage. I only have like, I think 2% on my helmet at this point, and then you could also get like 2.5% from the freaking powered monos or whatever, from Rai's blessing. Then that on top of like the leech on gear as well. Like you can get like on a relic, you can also get leech on a relic. All that combined could make the build feel a lot better. But that's generically the problem with this run, is I didn't have enough sustain. Now, just to showcase the difference in HP between Harbingers and Oribus real quick, just to give you an idea, the power creep, here's an Oribus. We literally kind of just bully him, to be honest. Once he actually gets over here, there you go. We actually end up kind of bullying Oribus when we get it all set up, because we can just like slam, 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 just get rid of all our Gathering Storm stacks, and it's just so funny watching them all go off on his ass. It's very satisfying. Um, when I was like doing some monolith grinding and I had to up a corruption on a mono, it was really funny, like insta giving the 100 corruption Oribus once I was like overpowered. All right, so if you don't know, the third Harbinger of Treason, he was very difficult for the old build, mainly because the kind of concept you're supposed to be doing is, you see that worm, you're supposed to actually kill that worm before you kill Hearten, because it makes the fight a lot easier. But it turns out even the Gathering Storm, like Earthquake node, it doesn't reach the worm either. Meaning I would have had to just bash my head against the wall until the worm died. And I'll be honest, I didn't want to have to fucking deal with that again. So we decided to just kill the Harbinger of Treason like cold turkey. Decided to just do it with the fucking worm. I just didn't care. Like, who cares? Let's do it. Fuck it, right? And like, it wasn't that bad. I need better leech than what I have right now to make this feel comfortable. As you can see, I'm probably like running around with like a chicken with its head cut off, and that's because I am. That's because I am. That's because, what ends up happening is there's just so many effects going on the screen, so many effect gore. Like, it's crazy the amount of effects going on the screen, right? And so many things that you have to dodge and all that. Now, if I had better leech, I could probably face tank most of this. I do have the survivability to do so. I just didn't have the leech to do so. And like I said, you end up doing like all of your damage in a short period of time, and then you wait around until you get more Gathering Storm stacks, and are also killing the totem. Like, there's a few different problems that could be solved with better gearing and just better drops. Because remember, this is like maybe like 8 hours into the character or something, so my gear is piss poor. It's just shit I picked up off the ground. So it's not like as if I refined anything. That's also another thing, is like every single build I end up playing in the zero to hero run ends up with no blessings. Blessings are like, I don't know, like let's say like 8 extra gear slots worth of stuff. Like, you get so much res, so much damage, so much survivability from your blessings that, like, it's crazy. Like, for instance, half the time I die to crits. I wouldn't be dying to crits if I actually had the right blessing, but with the way that they suggest you to do this, like the 10 out of 10 harbingers, right? You don't really have time to farm for blessings, and I'll be honest, like, it would increase the time of the run significantly. So I end up just going without blessings. But if this was like an actual run where like I actually cared, I would actually go get my blessings. Now, of course, we're doing another Harbinger here. We're just rushing through all the Harbingers because I'm getting way too good at pumping myself through corruption. So I end up just doing a bunch of Harbingers in a row because of that. So here's the Harbinger of Ash. He's not fun. Remember, like I said, with the leech thing, I don't have that much leech, meaning that the degen that he puts on the ground there, it will deal a very large amount of my HP and damage. So you generally don't want to be standing in it, but with the way that he does the ability, it almost has 100% uptime, meaning that I have to like dodge and get him out of the thing. But whenever I actually get to pelt his ass, I actually do damage. The problem is the damage uptime isn't that high because guess what? Hardy heart, we're a melee build. Because the target range on GS isn't large enough for me to like not be in melee range for this. So yeah, we end up having to deal with all of the melee problems that melee builds deal with without any of the benefits, mainly just a good leech. That's one of the main benefits of a melee build is having good leech, which we don't have right now. But yeah, that sucks. Also, as well, I checked my necrotic res after we were done with this. It turns out I only had 20% necrotic res, which makes a lot more sense now that I'm looking back and explains why I was having such a piss poor time. But let me put it like this: it definitely took more than one try to kill the Harbinger of Ash. Like, it was very frustrating. This boss, whenever you're playing anything that could be remotely like called a melee build or in melee range, a build that might be in melee range, this boss always sucks on because there's just a flurry of AoE attacks that just do very large amounts of damage. So it just makes everything feel terrible. Now, of course, to give you that whiplash, like I always do, here's an Orbis right after killing a Harbinger. Remember, guys, like, don't let ESG fool you. They have been causing crazy amounts of power creep in the game. You need to be aware of it, as like for instance, Cold Dot Werebear isn't really a build anymore because of all the power creep that's come in, right? And this is why. This is an Orbis. Like look how much HP he has, right? In comparison to like the amount of HP that the Harbinger had. Yeah, I would never want to play Cold Dot Werebear in a meta like this, in my opinion. Mainly because, the damage standards are just so much higher than they used to be. Like, it's so much higher. Here's the fifth Harbinger. He was a lot more difficult than usual this time around, mainly because he kept putting his cold dots, those cold dot pools, under him. He has the nasty thing that all the other Harbingers, like the fat ones, have, where one of his abilities is like an RNG roll. Like, whenever he puts those cold dots on the ground, it's at a random spot. Like, it's literally random. Like, I checked. It was like, no, it's not based on your positioning. It's not based on anything. All it's based on is just like randomness. It's literally just randomness. And the Fat Harbingers have this as well. And sometimes you just get a very low roll. Sometimes he can put two of them right on top of your face without you even knowing until it's too late, because they do damage before they even show up, quote unquote, right? Like, they have that animation and stuff like that, and they end up doing damage before you even notice that what's happening, because the server ticks and stuff like that. And it's just not pretty. But I'll be honest, I actually had a lot easier. Like, right there, he put three of them all around you, and of course they heat seek you. Like, imagine if like you weren't as mobile as this build is. Like, this build is way more mobile than your average build. Imagine if I had poo movement speed still, right? Could you imagine how terrible that would feel? But yeah, here's the Harbinger of War. One thing I've noticed though, actually, I actually had a worse time with the Harbingers, the fat ones, than the light ones. And I think that's because they just do so much damage with their attacks. And since this build is kind of like a face fucky build where you want to be in their face and just do damage and stuff like that, I ended up getting hit by their attacks a lot more often than I normally would. Also, as well, the fat Harbingers seem to have way more HP than the light Harbingers have, at least from my, my subjective point of view. From what I've seen so far, the fat Harbingers definitely seem as though they have more HP, but maybe I'm crazy, maybe it's not actually like that, but who knows. But yeah, here's the Harbinger of War down. All the light Harbingers, well, the almost all the light Harbingers dead. Now, the last footage was at 100 corruption. This footage is actually at 250 corruption. That just shows you how quickly we're getting in terms of pushing corruption. Because of the way that you can weave your corruption by utilizing needles and glyphs of envy, you can actually push corruption insanely high, insanely quickly. Like, if you want a new character to be in 700 corruption, you could probably do that pretty quickly. Like, it wouldn't really take that much time. And this is evident with my footage, as I immediately jumped to like 200 corruption the moment I got to empowered monos. And oh, let me tell you, the biggest problem with doing that is, do you have the gear for it, right? Like, Generally, no. Generally, I don't have the gear for it. But you know what? This is a run. We're just running. It's a good kind of test for the build, because if the build can handle me pushing it to the absolute extremes every second that I'm playing it, it means that if a nub comes along and wants to play it and plays like for way longer than I did, I think the total time of this run was like 14 hours. If someone ends up taking way longer to get to empowered monos because they're slow or whatever, they might end up being way better geared than I am, which means they'll have a much better time than me. But of course, my woes of lack of gearing never get fixed, as we never get lucky with any drops in general. At this point, I realized that I wanted a staff upgrade, but the problem is we didn't end up actually getting one. Even with me rolling 40,000 favor, I didn't end up getting a better staff than the one I'm wearing in the last planner. Uh, what I was trying to go for was one with better percent damage, because right now, at the current state of the character, I think I was at like 400% increased damage in total, which is very low, actually. Most characters can get double that and very quickly, especially if you're running a staff. That's actually the whole point of a staff, is like you can get to like 400% increased damage on one of the affixes if you like end up with a tier 7, right? Which I didn't have for a long time. That could have been like, I don't know, like 50% more damage easily if I just had access to that. Yeah, I don't end up with a good staff here. All right, now we're starting to enter what I call the boss rush phase, where we just fight a bunch of harbingers in a row. So here is the Harbinger of Pride. Very easy Harbinger, all things considered. This one actually, it's slowly going lower on my tier list of hard Harbingers, in my opinion. Now, here is another Oribus. This one actually takes me a decent amount of time to kill, and that's just mainly because it's a blood Oribus with like very spoopy abilities. That dot that he puts in the middle, it does a very large amount of damage in general, and you don't want to be sitting in it. And blood harbingers are definitely one of the harder enemy types, as those blood orbs, if you don't have your war cry ready to destroy the projectiles, which by the way, if you don't know, war cry destroys projectiles. If you don't have that ready, those blood orbs can do a lot of damage. But here, this is like when I get a glow up in terms of gear. I'm already at like 2700 HP, which makes me feel way tankier than before. But even then, like, I usually, the way I do it with these guys is I kind of just play it safe with blood Orbises, even if I feel like I have the damage to overpower him. The only problem is like it only takes one lucky crit for me to die at this point. So it's better to be safe, right? In my opinion. Now here's another DPS check. This is like where we end up with a little bit more damage. We're getting like 20k crits and stuff like that, and that helps a lot. That's like 200k per click. That's pretty good, actually, all things considered. That is pretty good. As you can see, we're generating enough stacks, and later on, we can even get more stacks, and this feels a lot better overall. Now, of course, we'd want more damage in this, but, you know, we're going to have to wait a little bit, right? Of course, here, let the boss rushing continue. Harbinger of Defilement. This one actually was a lot more difficult than I would want it to be, mainly because, like I said, same thing with the other Harbinger here, the Harbinger of War. You'd constantly, and I mean constantly, have him put his damage over time auras right on top of himself. And when you're playing a melee build, like, that sucks dick, man, because you have to move the Harbinger around, and it's not a pleasurable experience having the boss put like 5 damage over time auras on top of you. Like, I really think that like that specific ability, like, it needs some tuning to make it feel better. The fact that it's random and it's not like, you know, like actually predictable is what my problem is, because it feels like I'm at the mercy of RNGesus every time I play and every time I try to kill a Harbinger like this. Like, odds are sometimes he's just gonna like just wake up really angry and fuck your shit up, dude, because he's just like, hey, by the way, I'm gonna put damage over time on you. It's just insane to me how much damage those dot pools do for how hard they are to actually predict and dodge. I've gotten better at their mechanics where I can dodge their mechanics and know when he's going to put down the dots, but you know, of course, I don't know where he's going to put them, which sucks dick in my opinion. Of course, the next Orbis I get is another Blood Orbis because why not? Blood, like I said, is the hardest one for sure. Uh, but you know, like it's Orbis, it's not that big of a deal. We get to stun him, stuff like that. It's not that big of a deal. Although this one was like a little awkward because he put the dot pools on the ground and then like shot the meteor at you, and like if you're at the side of the arena like that, it's kind of a problem because you don't really have that much room to dodge when the dot pools are going off. For some reason, my war cry just decided to bug out there and I got hit by the blood orbs anyways. Kind of weird, but whatever, right? As you can see here, we're doing fine against this Orbis. It's not that big of a deal. Just you just take your time. Just don't try to force it because the blood Orbis can accidentally crit you and immediately kill you, so it's better to play it safe, right? All right, eighth harbinger, harbinger of tyranny. Something interesting that I'm noticing as I'm watching the footage back. Uh, this definitely didn't take as long as I thought it did. Like, so when I was in game and actually fighting the harbingers, it felt like hours, right, of just constantly waiting for their HP bar to go down. But, like, now I'm rewatching the footage, it wasn't all that bad. And it's just kind of interesting how, like, time in the moment is a lot different than, like, time now, like, me rewatching the whole thing. So, gives me a better appreciation for, how long these fights actually take. I really don't like how long the fights take though. Like, I'll be honest, like I built my character correctly. I have the damage I need. The only problem is I just don't have that much sustain. And of course, the biggest issue is I bump up so fast in corruption that I end up dealing with like a boss that has like 4 times the amount of HP, but I don't have 4 times the amount of gear. I'll tell you that much. Maybe 1.5 times the amount of gear that I had when I started in powered monos. And I think that's like the biggest problem is it's way quicker now to push corruption than it is to push gear, which I think is fine, by the way. I don't think that's terrible. I just think that the base health that harbingers have, how long their boss ward shields last. Like if EHG wants us to actually feel as though the boss word is just supposed to stop like meta builds and stuff like that, then like they probably should make the boss word not last so long. Like I think the boss word just lasts way too long. It overstays its welcome. Like you end up going through like 3 whole boss awards, which ends up being more HP than the boss entirely, and it just feels like I'm finding a blue bar instead of a red bar. Like I said before, boss rushing time. Don't really want to waste your guys' time. Generally, my Harbinger fights, they take around like 2 to 3 minutes at most, which isn't actually all that long to be considered. Like for a fresh character that I just started like 10 hours before the run, right? Like before getting here. So, it should be fine. The DPS on this build is a little bit less than what I would like, but that's just because I never got an upgrade to my staff, like at all. Like I should have like 50% more damage by now, which I just don't because I just never dropped a staff that was better than the staff I had. Like I don't have an exalted staff. I just have a normal staff. Like odds are you'd have an exalted staff by now. It's kind of crazy that I didn't, right? Now, here's a quick clip at 300 corruption. As you can see, our clear has not suffered at all with their lack of damage. It's just fine. It's like pretty good clear. That's actually why I even playing this build still instead of like re-rolling or whatever. Is the single target isn't like the best in the world, but the clear, oh my god, the clear just feels so good with like the movement speed and just like being able to pull out so many like gathering storms shot a stack so much. Like if you have like plus levels on your gear, you can get like 30% more clear out of your build. Like oh, that's gonna feel great. Here I am foolishly thinking that any of these are gonna be an upgrade, which they weren't, which sucks, right? But yeah, like oh my god, this build ended up feeling so much better than I could have ever have dreamed. Like way better than the Tempest Strike build. I'll tell you that much right now. All right, here's the 10th Harbinger. As we let the fight go on, let's talk about our opinions of the build. The clear, I would say S. feel really good once you actually get to scale your damage properly with gear and Merchant's Guild, or if you play a lot in COF, you get some plus levels on your Gathering Storm. Your clear can just reach the moon. It'll feel really great when you actually get to do that. The single target was, I would say, like B. It's good enough to be done. It's not like a crazy amount of single target, but it's not good enough for me to be like, wow, right? You need more gear to make the single target better, whether that be incorporating spell EQ into the mix, into the actual damage calculation, because, spell EQ does a lot of damage, or you could, of course, go the other route where you just have a bunch of plus levels to Gathering Storm and get more damage that way. Like, there's a few ways of going about it from this point, but like, those are the two ways I could see it. Survivability. The actual chunk is fine. The amount of damage we take when we get hit is not too much. I don't have any crit avoid at this point, but it doesn't matter. But like, the biggest problem with this build is the sustain. I think you could actually go with a setup where you run healing on your Maelstroms and your Warcry and some healing effect, and you wouldn't have to run Leech. And that means you could run a Peak of the Mountain with some investment in like Merchant's Guild or something like that. And that could end up feeling really good, right? I think that would actually end up being very good for the character overall. It's something you'd probably end up doing in Merchant's Guild though, because you'd want a Peak of the Mountain with like 3 LP or whatever. So yeah, overall, character felt good. Definitely can recommend. The single target is a little bit lower than what I would like, but it's not like the worst experience ever. And the speed of the clear makes up for how slow the bosses are, in my opinion. All right, here we are in game with the character. Let's just do a quick overview of everything so you guys can understand how I went about this character. So for Gathering Storm here, we actually go all the way down here through the range node, the Ligonian Diplomacy, into Friends of the Tempest. This is the most important part of the build, otherwise it wouldn't function. This is the way that we generate so many storm stacks to be able to kill enemies with. Then, of course, we also go up through here. We grab 3 points into Storm Gathers. It makes it so that whenever we would expend a Storm stack, you have a chance of gaining a stack instead of losing one. This node is very deceptive. It's actually like 36% more damage, because instead of losing a stack, you gain one, which means that when you're using your Earthquake on a single target, it can go up and down, up, down, up, down a bunch. And it ends up making it so that you end up with way more mileage out of your storm stacks, as you can see in the footage like later on and all that. Now, of course, here we have base crit with Maelstrom. That's very important as well. This gives us enough base crit so that we can run a little bit of crit on our gear to crit cap. That on top of the Warcry's 200% crit should be enough to get you in a good spot. We also grab the mana on Mana Fuse Storm. We also grab the mana on the passive tree as well. And that's pretty much it for Gathering Storm. Now, if you had plus levels, of course, you grab Looming Clouds for extra clear. You could grab Thunderous Skies for Thunderous Strikes for more damage, some, lightning penetration. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You could also maybe grab the Typhoon for some extra stun, but of course, that would be like luxury points. And that's pretty much it for Gathering Storm. Warcry, stereotypical utility Warcry setup, mainly pull, cooldown, Maelstroms, crit chance, good to go. Not really anything else crazy with a Warcry here. Maelstrom here, utility Maelstrom, just the frenzy, the haste. Then we also get the power of the storm to get the storm bolts while we're clearing. Just lots of extra clear while we're clearing. Feels pretty good. Then we also grab Cyclone so that we can grab the nodes after it, the global stun chance. This makes it so we can stun trash and make it so that they can't hit us as easily. Same thing with like diamond matrons and stuff like that. Very good for those kind of situations. Earthquake here. This is a utility Earthquake setup. I know it's crazy to say that, but the idea is we're going to grab Fury of the Elements to get the 10 storm stacks expended, right? Then we're going to grab the mana efficiency so we can spam Earthquake, so we don't have to worry about the mana cost as much. Then we also grab the extra stacks of Armor Shred. This makes it so we don't need as many stacks of Armor Shred on our character, like Chance as well. I think I only have like, what is it? Like 28% chance. So this makes up for the rest of the armor stack shreds that we wouldn't have normally. And that's pretty much it for Earthquake here. Storm Totem. Mainly you want the movement speed. You want the cast speed so that we generate more stacks. You want the area so that each individual area of the storm totem, like the storm totem AoE stuff, it hits multiple targets so that you can actually, generate stacks quicker. Yeah, it makes it feel a lot better. Then also as well, we grab the percent damage here, and we also grab the mana efficiency here as well. And that's pretty much it for the skills. Let's talk about the passives that are important. So passives that are important, nothing too crazy. Just grab as much attunement as possible. For Beastmaster, we're just getting the DR from Earthsign Strength and the DR from Boarheart. The Boar aspect of the Boar tag still does exist, but instead of being 16 points or whatever, now it's just 10 points. It feels a lot better this way, in my opinion. Then Shaman here, getting this for the mana on Gathering Storm hit lets us sustain mana on single target. Getting the cast speed while you have a totem, you want as much cast speed as possible to make the build feel good. Then, of course, totem cast speed. This makes it so that the totem will generate more storm stacks for you. Very good. Grab 5 points in Avatar of Thunder. Gives us a lot of extra pen that we normally wouldn't have access to. We have a 60 attunement right now, I think, right? 70 attunement. That's like 35 extra pen for free, which is great. Eventually, 8 out of 8 for the flat spell damage here. Get all the flat spell damage you can. Then attunement here for the increased mana regen per attunement. Right now, we have 70% increased mana regen from that. It's a lot of extra mana regen. Then 5 points in Lagan's Answer. They give us extra Storm Bolts whenever we cast a spell, which is all the time. Then even more cast speed up here. It also gives our totems Frenzy, which means that they have a 20% increased cast speed, which is cool. Makes us generate storm stacks quicker. Then we also eventually grab 8 out of 8 of Conflicts. The area is good for the overlaps on our Gathering Storm. The less damage taken is good, and the 20% indirect cast is just more damage. Then we also have Ascendant Circle here, which is more spell damage with an active totem, so we can actually, do more damage. We want as much damage as possible with this kind of stuff. And that's pretty much it for the passives. That's pretty much it for the skills. Let's talk about the gearing, right? So no uniques this time around. That's actually the best part about this, is there's no uniques. Now, of course, eventually you could incorporate uniques to make the build a lot better, but right now we don't have any. Eventually you'd want like a Peak of the Mountain, maybe go with a healing setup with Maelstrom and stuff like that, but right now, no uniques. See here, our helmet, absolute fucking ass. The only reason we're using it is because it has attunement on it and it has the leech on it. Other than that, we'd use a different helmet. Amulet here, mana regen, shitty crit multi, HP on a terrible base. As you can tell, our gear is really bad. Stat here, cast speed, lightning damage. Eventually, you want exalted lightning damage, but we do have stun chance and shock on hit, which feels good. Chest here, HP, attunement, percent damage. Eventually, you want this on a better base with Gathering Storm level. Gathering Storm level feels really good because you can end up grabbing all the extra points that we don't have in the Gathering Storm tree. Eventually, +4, right? Then ring here, attunement, crit chance, HP, whatever res you can get. Belt here, increased health, HP, Praetorian belt, pretty good. We want as much armor as possible. Then here, ring, crit chance, attunement, HP. This is actually one of the best pieces of gear that I dropped for the character so far. Feels really good to have a silver ring like this in a run like this. Then gloves here, these gloves are actually pretty good as well. The prefix, the secondary prefix doesn't matter, but like eventually you'd want attunement there. But here we have crit chance, eventually you want attunement, then HP alongside shred armor on hit, which feels great. Boots here, HP, movement speed, attunement. It actually bricked. We ended up with terrible boots, but it's fine because we're actually a class that actually gets a scale movement speed outside of our boots, so it's not that big of a deal. Then relic here, cast speed, mana regen. Eventually this could have been attunement and like spell crit or crit multi or something like that, and of course some frailty as well. Then for idols, you want the less frequency of storm stacks and 20 flat with it, but either that or cast speed with totems, probably cast speed with totems, and then percent damage if you have a totem, right? A better roll than what I have here, right? This is probably your best in slot idol. You want an idol like this. Also as well, percent damage while you have an active totem. Then as well here, just some increased lightning damage as well. And that's pretty much it for the idols, and that's pretty much it for the character. With all that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go do something else. Bye.